So awesome. All right. Hi, everybody. Just in case people don't know me, I think I know everyone here. So actually, I don't have to introduce myself. Anyway, what we're going to do today is I'm going to have everyone here is going to read. Or if you want to, you can say no, that's not a problem. But we're going to look at Sif Aleph in the Shulchan Aruch, which we were doing Sif Aleph, just to remind people, on Monday. We really started with the Gemara in Yevamot. And really a lot of Gemara and Yevamot, and then Rav Landis kind of went through the tour a little bit, and we didn't spend that much time with the Shulchan Aruch. I know that Rav Nachum is going to do some more of Siman Aleph in 2 weeks, I think it is now, like the one Monday we have in September. But nonetheless, I kind of want to run through all of it, because since everyone here has seen it, with a couple achronim. And then maybe we'll just, it is Chazarah, so just trying to get a sense of the halacha that's going on here. So we're just going to dive in and start. And people, please feel free to ask questions, challenge, comment, and so forth. That's the way we work. This is just a way to kind of get us back into the material. So, and so I'm going to just, maybe I'll do reading by volunteers. So let's start with Siman Aleph Sif Aleph Chayav Kol Adam, and I'll background this. Rav Landis pointed out in Shir, right? The tour starts out with this very kind of nice, this interesting intro about why you should get married and how it's such a great thing, and actually we're going to see it come back in the Ramah a little bit, and the Bach challenges him for it. And then the Bach explains it a little bit, but you'll see that, as he pointed out, the Shulchan Aruch just starts with the word chayav, right? There's no intro here. What is your obligation in terms of marriage? So here we go. Anyone want to read to begin with? Otherwise, I'm volunteering Yavni. So,
okay,
go for it, Yavni.
חייב כל אדם לישא אישה כדי לפרות ולפרות. וכל מי שאינו עוסק בפרי ערבייה כאילו שופך דמים וממעט את הדמות וגורם לשכינה להסתלק מישראל.
Great.
Do you want me to
you don't need to translate necessarily, just like give us a very quick summary.
Every person, probably every man needs to marry a woman in order to be fruitful and multiply. And if you are not doing that, then it's as if you're shedding blood and causing and lessening God and causing the presence of God to leave Israel.
Great. Just according to just this from the Chaber, what's the point of getting married?
To have kids.
Great, right? Nothing else in this piece right here. Right? It's like completely Pri Arvia at this point. So, all right. But I'll just stop there quickly. Any thoughts, questions before we push on here? Anyone want to claim? You can claim differently that this is the Shulchan Aruch's only goal at this point. Yeah, Sarah, go for it.
It's just surprising to me that he's like so clear about that, given where he ends up on some of the other questions later.
Yeah, I agree. It's a shocking start to it,
right? Because he's actually whatever. I guess we'll get to all the other places.
Yeah.
But he seems like he is, thinks that you need to marry even not for procreative purposes. At which point, it's like a little shocking that he says this.
Mm-hmm. So yeah, it's I was thinking about this a little bit. One way to read this isn't that you need to get married. The reason for marriage is Pri Arvia, but in order to do Pri Arvia, you need to get married, which is a different statement, right? Those are two.
Right. So you might say, but I don't know. Chayav kol adam lisa isha kedei.
Yeah.
Right? That just sounds like you are obligated to do this in order.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Mm-hmm. So,
yeah.
Yeah, no, and that's a voice in this conversation here. There is a voice that always hangs out over this, that marriage is important for the sake, essentially marriage is all about children. And there's another thing, or at least passing on the line or something like that. And there's another thing in the background that no, marriage is about some other factors. And one of the other things you get out of it that's very important is having children, and that tension will always sit. And of course, right, that tension will also sit with us, as Rav Landis pointed out, of, I actually really like this metaphor of that there's like the two competing, this is all from a very male perspective, and the two competing things in life are Torah and women, right? It's like you have to have a wife and you have to have Torah, and those two things are constantly in tension with each other. And both of them, right? We see this actually. It doesn't get pointed out in Shir, but in the Sugya and Yevamot, right? You have Rabbi Yoshua who says, right, Al Tanach Yadcha Ba'erev, right? That you should plant your seed in the evening. And
For a second on that?
What was that? Say again. Someone jumped in. Go for it.
I was going to say, Joel, I'm just going to turn my video off so you can hear me better.
Oh, yeah, go for it. Yeah.
The idea that there's these two competing loves, Torah and women, I think could be true. Like, it's hard to balance all the demands of life. But I'm like, the truth is, when I think of so many frum men who don't dedicate their lives to learning, I really think it's their wives that make it possible. Like, they're the ones doing grocery shopping and cooking and cleaning and wiping, the butts of toddlers. And like, if those women weren't there cooking dinner, those men would be eating crackers all the time.
Yeah, it's a great point. I don't think it's a realistic view of the world necessarily. I think it is something like a fantasy that kind of people fall into, though, is that, I can spend all my time with Torah and do nothing else. And well, remember, if you don't have children, then maybe that's possible as well, right? If you're not, but yeah, it's a great point.
I was actually thinking something. I was thinking this during the week, something along the lines of what you just said, is that I know this came up last year a lot of times with the Yoreh De'ah. A lot of times the halachot that they're giving us are not really about the halachot they're talking about. I remember we discussed this. Here, I think he's kind of describing this idealized version that's not necessarily realistic. And I think a lot of the halachot in this whole siman are doing that. But I go back also to my days. I remember Rav Dov Berkovitz one time. We were talking about the people who spend their entire lives just spending Torah. And it made me think of I thought about that this week when I was reading the Ben Azai bit in Yevamot. And Rav Berkovitz said, somebody who just spends his entire life, 6 days a week, 18 hours a day in the Beis Midrash, it's all wasted learning. Because the point of learning isn't to know, the point of learning is to live it.
Yeah.
And that's one of the problems I was having actually the other night when we were talking about this is, these two competing loves that we talk about, but the point of the love of Torah is supposed to be to live Torah.
Yeah. And to pass it on, right? Which to
pass it on,
yeah. And that is what I was, like the whole Rabbi Akiva thing, where it's like Rabbi Yeshua's statement about having lots of children suddenly switches to have lots of Talmidim, right? That's how Rabbi Akiva switches it. It's like Rabbi Akiva, even though he's married, dedicates his life to the Beit Midrash at the end of the day and Talmidim more than his children. It doesn't work so well in some ways, but that's a whole nother. That's a drasha, and that's not like we're in a halacha shir right now. Right. Good. All right, that's great. I'm thinking about time. I want to push this though, Yavni. Let's go to the Haggah that the Ramah is going to add here.
מי שאין לו אישה שרוי בלא ברכה, בלא תורה וכולי, ולא נקרא אדם, וכיוון שנשא אישה, עוונותיו מפקפקים, שנאמר, מצא אישה, מצא טוב, ויפק רצון מאת השם.
Great. So I think, maybe I'll let people comment, right? I think the Ramah, we've seen the background on this, and this is from the Gemara, and it shows up as the beginning of the Torah in many ways, right? This is a different view of marriage, I think, right? It's not just about Pri Arvia. There's some other, like marriage makes you a better person somehow, or your sins go away, or whatever it may be. But there is like an incompleteness to a person without marriage, which I think there's a lot to say about that, about, like where the truth does or does not lie in that and so forth. But all right, I will leave it open unless there's any comments or questions about that. I don't think I had any achronim I wanted to look at in particular. Oh, I did actually. Where was that? Yeah. Oh no, it's next one. So no, we're good. Unless anybody else has some comments on this or thoughts.
Just to say that the Beit Shmuel is like raises some really disturbing concerns. That's all I have to say about that.
Yes. Okay.
I have nothing useful to say about it other than like.
Sarah, yeah, I thought long and hard about whether or not we should do that Beit Shmuel right now, and I decided not to derail us. It's worth looking at.
Sorry.
Yeah, no, it's
Well,
great. Beit Shmuel Aleph, Sif Katan Aleph in the Beit Shmuel gets into the whole question, essentially about like, are you required to have sex at the regular times, whether or not the husband and wife or either one of them desire it at that time if you don't have any kids. I'm not going there right now. I think it's an important thing to actually talk about. Just like that's like a full shear, unfortunately. And yeah, it is shocking. You should look at it. It's based on a Rambam. I get all the details right there about that Beit Shmuel.
Yeah, I mean, pretty much. I think the only reason that's interesting is like, why is it here in like Dafka here? And what he's reacting to is like, how can you say that marriage is for procreation if there's this whole question about like who can refuse what at what time?
Yeah. So but I think it's a great point. It's like that leads to that tension will always sit there, that marriage is about procreation and marriage is actually about something else as well. And those two things are always competing with each other.
Right. And like the issue of like who's refusing sex when is like one place where that comes out in intense ways.
Yeah, and it's and I will say, it's like, as so many topics are in Even HaEizer, it's like, this isn't, as opposed to like being in the Isser V'Heter, sections of your idea that we were doing last year, where it's like, is my spoon kosher? Is my spoon not kosher? Is my soup kosher? Is my soup not kosher? Like that can be important stuff, but there's a lot less baggage that goes with it than does with this material. So good. All right, let's do bet. And we're going to do a Ber Hetev on this as well. I think we're going to do the Ber Hetev. We're not, but we're going to do a Chalkat Mechokek. That's the next one anyway. So let's do that one quickly. I'll read this one. This is short. Bet ein mochin sefer Torah ela kedei lelmod Torah v'lisa isha. Right. There's only two reasons you could you are permitted to sell a sefer Torah. One is to learn Torah, right? For instance, you just, you need funds for the Talmidim to eat, or there's all sorts of reasons. This is actually a very complicated topic that shows up in other places. But the other one is to marry a woman, right? And this is, again, playing out Rav Lanis's claim, which I'm buying for the moment. And I might continue to buy that. This is like the competition between Torah and marriage that goes on, or the tension between Torah and marriage. So,
in that you're selling a Torah, or in that the two reasons are one is Torah and one is marrying?
Both that learning Torah and getting married are almost on the same pedestal as like the highest things in some ways, like the two things that you can sell a Torah for. And also you are able to sacrifice Torah only for the sake of itself, essentially, or for the sake of marriage. Right? Those are the two things for which you can, when I say selling a Torah is like a sacrifice, Sefer Torah is a lot of work to do. And, I can imagine, I don't know. I actually have no clue how many Sifrei Torah were going around the world at the time of the Gemara. When Megillah, when Masechet Megillah is put together, or even when the Shulchan Aruch is put together. But I imagine they're not always so easy to come by. Okay. Any other thoughts or questions about that?
How is a Sofer Stam supposed to make a living?
Oh no! Well, no, you can sell a Torah to a community. Like you can be commissioned, I think, right, to write a Torah for them. That's, okay. I mean, that's a whole other set of rules. But I'm pretty sure.
Yeah, fine. We don't have to go to that.
Yeah, that's but that's a great point. Okay, let's see. Sarah, you want to take Gimel?
Sure. Mitzvah al kol adam sheisa isha ben yod echet v'makdim lisa ben yod gimel mitzvah mina muvchar.
Great.
Should I keep going?
Yeah, keep going.
Okay, אבל קודם יוד ג' לא יישא, תהווה כזנות, ובשום עניין לא יעבור מ-20 שנה ולא אישה, ומי שעברו עליו 20 שנה ואינו רוצה לישא, בית דין קובעים אותו לישא כדי לקיים מצווה פרייה ורבייה. ומי אם עוסק בתורה ותרוד, probably I guess square brackets are right?
Yeah.
ותרוד בה ומתיירא לישא, כדי שלא יטריח במזונו ויטביל מן התורה, מותר להתאחר.
Great. Summarize the ages for us here.
So once you're 18, you have an obligation to marry. When you're 13, from 13 to 18, it's like good to marry. Before 13 is nut, and you shouldn't wait until after 20, the Beit Din can force you to marry in order to be Mekayim.
Exactly. With which exception?
With the exception of someone who thinks that someone who's like Osek B'Torah and thinks that they won't be able to pay for it.
Yeah. So I actually, did you say 18 or 20 for when the Beit Din can force you? So,
20.
Okay, you did. Okay, yeah, good. So for some reason I heard 18. So, but great, right? So, there's these ages much younger than, of course, people generally get married in the modern world.
Can I ask what might be a stupid question, but maybe it's throwing a wrench into our understanding?
I'll tell you if it's not. You go for it. Yeah.
Lo ya'avor me'esrim shana belo isha. Now, if the youngest they're saying you could take an isha is 13, maybe it's not saying that at 20 the Beit Din can force you, but at 33.
Oh, go 20 years?
Because it's 20 years of not having a wife, but that should only be counted at the time you're allowed to have a wife.
It's an interesting read. Everyone seems to understand all these as ages though. So I've never, so I'm going to doubt that, but if you can find an Acharon who makes that claim, tries to read that language in that way.
How about a very, very Acharon? I'll make the claim.
Yeah, exactly.
Acharon min Acharonim.
But,
because it also doesn't seem, even when we're talking within this idealized world, the idea of once you turn 18, you've got 2 years and that's it.
Yeah, well, remember is like 18 is the mitzvah here, right? Mitzvah is like an interesting use, right? Like when you're 18 is when you should be doing it. It's even better to do it earlier, in 2 years. Remember also, this wasn't like, I think we often think about, marriage being done as like you go on dates and then you date someone for a while and you decide if it works out and you break up or you don't, right? I don't think that's their world in a lot of ways,
Right. That's true.
So, but yeah, it's an interesting point. And it's like, and I will say that I think that a lot of, like how relationships work in the modern frum world is trying to see how does this Seif in particular, the Shulchan Aruch, map onto the modern reality of people, for instance, learn much later than 20, which we will see. We're actually going to look at like when they say, like, if you're, busy being Osek B'Torah, you can, put it off. Like, well, how long can you put it off? Is a question that's going to open here. Can you put it off indefinitely, like Ben Azai, or is it that you actually, can only put it off for a couple of years, for instance? So, but I'm good with that. I wanted to look. There's a Chalkat Mechokek Sif Katan Bet, which I wanted to look at. It's pretty short. I'll read it. This is that you should marry a woman, Shisa Isha Ben Yudchet, that you should be at 18, that's the mitzvah. He says, Afal Gav Dechol Mitzvot Chayav LaKayem Miyad Kishanaseh Ben Yud Gimel, right? That even though, right, the day you turn bar mitzvah, right, it's all from the male perspective, all the mitzvot kind of like come rushing onto you, like you're chayav and everything. Mikol makom mitzvah zo kiblu chazal sheben yudchet lechupa me'achar shetzarich lomod kodem shisa isha. All right, he says this one is an exception. This one you actually don't, the mitzvah doesn't come onto you until you're 18, because you need to learn first, right? V'harchalat limud gemara hu miben, I think it's chamesh esrei ve'elach, right? And so, and you remember, according to Pirkei Avot, you don't really start learning Gemara until you're 15. So there's no way, you've got 3 years to learn Gemara before you actually have to get married. And so therefore, this one mitzvah gets pushed off. It's interesting, kiblu chazal, like, is this like a Torah, Moshe Misinai, or is this actually a case of like where they actually have a decree that goes against the Torah, but it's, shev ve'al taseh is different. You're allowed to do that. That's a nice little thing for Rosh Hashanah. I'm just going to throw a Rosh Hashanah thing in here, right? People know this. I don't know if people know this, Sugya, right? That the whole question why Chazal can say you can't blow shofar on Shabbat when Rosh Hashanah falls on Shabbat, like how can you negate that mitzvah? And they say that Chazal are allowed to negate mitzvot where they say don't do something, right? The Torah commands you. So, but anyway, potentially. All right. Any thoughts so far on that? Anything there? Sarah, I just want to repeat. Oh yeah, Sarah, it's a really interesting point. Like earlier in the Gemara period, a lot of academics have done this work, right? It seems to be that actually maybe you were chayav a mitzvah, it wasn't like they didn't all come rushing onto you at 13. They came at different ages. And we definitely see, right, Shammai personally seems to think that the moment his son is born, has a chiyuv and sukkah, right? It's so Josh Colt put it to me once. He's like, yeah, when you can do a mitzvah, you do the mitzvah, and when you're a 3-minute-old baby, you can sit in the sukkah. It's not that hard. You just have to cut a hole in your roof. So that's all right. With that, I also wanted to see, I think it was, Neber Hetev, hey. This is a whole question of if you get married before 13, it's like znut. I'll read this one too. People have the Ber Hetev at the bottom of, or for me, it's at the, like.
What's
say
the Zibor Hamatzio?
It is kiznut.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thanks.
So, all right. So he says, Zeudat Harambam Betur, right? We actually saw this whole debate here of like, can you get married? Do you have to wait till you're 13? Can be before? So he's going to summarize this. Aval Tosfot Verosh, Sfirule de la Have Znut, Kevan de Biktushin, Bikidushin, Hietzlo, right? They say, no, it's not Znut as long as you do Kiddushin. Vayen Chokat Mechokek, Uvet Shmuel. All right. Uvshuvat Knesset Yechezkel, this is actually what I wanted to see. Sheila Nunhe, right? Mechalek im aviv masiola katan, az ha'av yitpos metaltalim liktuba, az have mitzvah, aval im hu atzmo nose isha have kiznut, mitam de efshar lichtov ktuba de ein maseh katan klum, right? V'yishrei mishto b'lo ktuba, v'have biatznut ayen sham. Okay, so he makes this interesting suggestion that this is the Knesset Yechezkel, that if I'm 12 and I marry a woman, it's bilad znut because I can't write a ketubah. I can't take responsibility halachically that I would have to have in a marriage, a financial responsibility of the ketubah, because I'm too young. I don't have dat yet. But if my father does it and he puts aside money that's meshuabad, or puts aside metalton that's meshuabad to the ketubah, then I can, and that's fine. And that's the way he makes the distinction here between when it's znut and when it's not, when is it permissible. I don't know much to say about that. It's probably not a case that's showing up too much in our world, but I found that interesting. So, Sarah?
Well, actually, I disagree that this isn't something that's showing up in our world. I mean, we don't have it at 13, right? Or 12.
Uh-huh.
But the idea, like the entire idea of kollel is often that your parents are supporting you, right? So in a sense,
yeah,
if you get married while you're learning in kollel, like, do you really have the ability to support your wife? No, you don't. Or any number of other circumstances. I mean, a lot of people who are in, say, graduate school are getting parental support. There are any number of cases in which I think this applies, even if the ages aren't the same.
That's a really interesting idea, Isaac. And Sarah will come to you in a second. Sorry, it's if we're talking about, because one of the things, if you read the intro to the Rambam in particular and the Mishnah Torah on this topic, like financial responsibility is a huge part of marriage, of like halachic marriage, and this is what's playing out here, is that, yeah, maybe that is a case of like, we sign the ketubah, like just kind of like, oh, it's this document we signed, but there is actually like a financial responsibility to it that says even like the shirt off my back, it's literally written in the ketubah, like if that has to go to support my spouse, in this case, it's always the husband supporting the wife, but in order, if we get divorced or I die, and you have no actual assets to do that, that might be problematic. I never thought about it that way, but it's really interesting thought. So, and Sarah, you had a thought too.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's interesting that part of what seems to be going on here is that they can't accept the idea that there could be a marriage that like is technically affected by kiddushin in the normal way, mm-hmm. that is also znut.
Yes.
Like they can't put those things together. And so then they have to come up with some, right? So I think like what's going on with the Ber Hetev is just like making a better version of I think the Chelkat Mechokek basically says this, that's like, well, it's just not really Kiddushin. They didn't do anything, right? Because the Katan doesn't have dat, so he can't really sign the thing. So like then there's like married velo ketubah, and like we already know that's not allowed.
Yeah.
Which like just doesn't seem shot at all. I just like, right, like it just seems like actually what's going on is they're saying this kind of marriage could be a marriage, but it's a gross marriage and we don't like it.
Yeah.
As opposed to it's not a marriage at all, and like the kiddushin doesn't go through. I don't know. There's something very like,
Yeah, no,
we want a formalism that will account for this, as opposed to just saying like, well, it's sort of like lo hagun, and like it's just like not nice, right?
I think this is actually in some ways reminiscent, maybe I'm wrong, but it might be reminiscent of the debate that goes on between the Rambam and the Ravad, where the Rambam really seems to only have two categories, right? You either have, proper Be'ilah or you have Beilat Znut. And proper Be'ilah happens in the context of marriage, and then there's Beilat Znut. And that's it. The Rambam has two categories, said and done, right? If it's not a marriage, it's Znut. And the Ravad takes him to task for it, where he says, no, we've got an entire example of the Pilegish in the Torah, which is not Beilat Znut and it's not in marriage, right? There's clearly a third category. And I think that's one of the things that goes on here is like, is there a method where there is, a sexual relationship between people that's not, you don't, for whatever reason, fit into the halachic marriage, there's no ketubah in particular is what they're talking about, usually, or kiddushin doesn't work. And yet it's not it's not as problematic, or maybe it's not problematic at all, right? Those are all questions.
Right, but it's like super striking then that the Rambam is actually Dafka the one saying, right? Because it's like the Rambam and the Tur on one side and Tosfot and Rosh on the French guys on the other side.
Mm-hmm.
That the Rambam is the one saying that this is znut, and not this is a marriage, but it's a bad one.
Yeah.
Just like because like he's always
black and white,
like on that on that machloket, he's on the team like, well, there's like, you can have like sex with random people in the shuk, or you can have marriage, and like those are the options.
Exactly. Yeah, and this one seems to be within some more, it's not in the shuk kind of rubric, but it would be an interesting, if anyone, it's an interesting long piece to put together the Rambam's entire take on this whole topic, and I'm sure someone has done it. Probably worth doing again. So, all right, we are in a Chazarah here, so I do, unless someone has another comment on this piece, I want to push on a little bit. Sarah, you want to read the Ramah for us?
Sure. ובזמן הזה נהגו שלא לכוף על זה, וכן מי שלא קיים פרייה רבייה, ובא לישא אישה שאינה בת בנים, כגון עקרה וזקנה, או קטנה, משום שחושק בה, או משום ממון שלה, אף על פי שמדינה היה מחות בו, לא נהגו, וכמה דורות לדקדק בעניין הזיווגים. ואפילו בנשא אישה ושהה עמה 10 שנים ולא נהגו לכוף אותו. לגרשה, אף על פי שלא קיים פרייה רבייה, וכן בשאר ענייני זיווגים. ובלבד שלא תהיה אסורה עליו.
Great. So the Beit Din has gotten out of the business in Ashkenaz of dealing with these cases, right? Essentially, right? We don't force people to get married, and we don't force people to get divorced unless there's an actual Isur going on here, right? It's interesting, like what's an actual Isur? It seems to be like an erva kind of Isur, or maybe even like I think it's an interesting question. Like someone actually, did I put that on there? Someone actually makes a comment about this at some point about like what counts as Asura in this case. So anyway, I don't know if people saw, I sent out the tshuva of the Rivash this is all based on, which is a fascinating case. But if you didn't see it, it's a case of a young man who still seems to be in his, he's in his earlier years, and he wants to marry a 90-year-old very rich woman. And he has not fulfilled Pri Arviyah. She has, does she have an obligation? It's a whole other question, but it's like, it's worth looking at and seeing how the Ramah compares to that. So
I think it's also very interesting. We talk about how marriage then isn't like marriage today, at least not within most communities. I know within some it is, but obviously within this world, marriage had nothing to do with love. And the fact that they say, well, but if there is love, it's fine, but it doesn't have to be love. It could also just be that she's very rich.
Yes.
And I find that a very interesting kind of, these are the two things that are sort of held on the same level, sort of like you were saying earlier, the Sefer Torah can be sold either for limud Torah or for marrying a wife. And here, these are also being held on the same level. Well, she's very old, but he really likes her, or she's very rich, then it's grouped together, and it's a very,
I don't know. I'm actually I'm gonna I'm going to amend what you said a little bit. I think that love was a part of at least some marriages in their world. It just wasn't. It wasn't always a factor, and it wasn't always the prime factor, right? It could be, and that's interesting.
Well, I think what comes out here is it's saying if there is love, that's fine, but it's not a necessity. It's not it's not something you look for. But if it's there, that's great. That's nice. But everything up until now, the first three halachot had nothing to do with any actual feeling or emotion. It was just you do it, and if you haven't done it yet, the Beit Din can come in and say, okay, it's time because you've got to do Pri Arvia.
Yeah, definitely.
It doesn't matter if you like it. It's like the Monty Python. Don't like her. What's not to like? She's got huge tracts of land. But it's just
That's a great point, Yavni. Fear of the Beit Din is an emotion, and and also like fear of living in your community in a particular way is that you want to fit in, and so. Okay, good. I actually realized I skipped. I wanted to do before the Beratev. It's worth looking at Vav where he says you can, when it talks about if you're learning you can push off marriage. He says like on infinitum, as long as your yetzer is not mikaber alecha, right? Whatever that may mean. And so I'll leave it at that.
That's the next C.
It that's the interesting thing. It isn't. Yeah, you're right. Because when we get to the case of Ben Azai, but remember in Sif Gimel already, they mentioned that, right? It's mutar lehitacher if you're afraid that your Torah is going to be bitul. So it's a great point, Yavni, too. Is like as we read Dalet, like what is the connection between that and Dalet? Are they really the same thing? Is Ben Azai just an extension of that rule or not? Is I think what I'm trying to get at there. And with that, Asher, you want to read Dalet for us?
All right. ומי שחשקה נפשו בתורה כבן עזאי תמיד, ונדבק בה כל ימיו ולא נשא אישה, אין בידו עוון, והוא שלא יהא יצרו מתקבל עליו.
Great. So
a guy who is just so in love with Torah, like Ben Azai, and he's just committed to it all of his life, and so he never married a woman. He hasn't committed any avera as long as as we were saying, his yetzer doesn't overcome him. And what struck me with that is it's almost saying, if you have to choose, if you have to say put aside Torah in order to marry, the reason is because if you don't, you're going to be so desperate for some kind of physical release that you won't focus on Torah.
Yeah.
And so that when we say that we're putting them both on the same level, we're really not. We're just saying it's not realistic for most people to never ever have some kind of physical relationship, and so if you try to put them in that, then their Torah study won't be what it should be.
Yeah, it's a great point. I mean, it's in the end of the day, it's like, is this a backhand way of saying that Torah is actually the most important thing? We definitely don't ever, as far as I know, maybe someone could correct me, nobody ever says, and somebody who's like so choshek for another person that they don't feel like they could ever focus on studying Torah, they should just be choshek for that person and spend all their life in dealing with their marriage and never which is maybe an extreme. Like I don't think any marriage works that way that I know of, but it's but at the end of the day, Torah study maybe kind of wins out over all of this. I don't know. Good. All right. Let's move on from Ben Azai, just looking at the time. Hey, Masha, do you want to read, or are you?
Sure, I can. I'm playing catch up with looking at the material since I didn't get any of the notifications, but I think I know what we're doing.
Oh, great.
כיוון שיש לאדם זכר ונקבה, קיים מצוות פריה ורבייה, והוא שלא יהיה הבן סריס או הנקבה העילונית, נולדו לו זכר ונקבה.
Good. That's a good stopping point. So, yeah, just hey for the moment. So I'll have you keep going in a second. But
so if a man has had a male child and a female child, he has fulfilled Piriya and Rivia. And if the son was, I guess at least in this context, is sexually sometimes it's translated as sexual intersex or unable to sexually function normally. The item is an undeveloped, a physically undeveloped woman who never passes beyond puberty.
Exactly.
So children who can't themselves reproduce.
Yeah. So great. And this is, I mean, it's like, if you want a nice explanation, the Rambam does a really nice job explaining the halachic categories of Sris and Ilanit, which I think you're right. I think it seems to be someone who, it's not somebody who, can't procreate for all sorts of other physical reasons, but very simply that they seem to never hit puberty for whatever reason. So, all right, but anyway, the big takeaway, you have to have one male, one female child. This is the Beit Hillel ruling in the Mishnah, and that's the mitzvah at the end of the day. So, good. Any thoughts or questions on that before we push on a little bit? Okay. Yeah, go
I
for
would
it.
just throw out there that there's a number of places in the Gemara and the Mishnah, or well, technically there's a Septa, where they're very clear that like we understand like the Ilanit and the Saris and the Tumtum, etc., as like very much full members of the community. And this seems like a push against that in a sense, like that somehow your children don't count if they're an Ilanit or a Saris.
Great. Yeah.
And I am not a fan. I mean, I feel like that's a given, but I just it seems like this is counteracting previous like thrust or like theme towards looking at folks with intersex conditions.
No, Isaac, I think it's a great point. And I don't want to, this is not as an apologetics as, one way is, but I think that in some ways there are different categories of like what counts, like these counts as children, but they don't count. PRVIA might be about more than just having children. It might be about, Sarah, you mentioned this to me, so I'm going to repeat it. If I get it wrong, I apologize. Like that it's about a line that can keep procreating ad infinitum. And that's one of the things you have to leave as a legacy. Maybe it's like hard to say. But yeah, I don't want to undermine your point, which I think is actually very important, and I'm going to leave it out there as well. And so hopefully I did leave it out there a little bit. Yeah. And this will come up also, right, with people. We will actually see that, for somebody who has where it does count, where somebody who has a child who's a cheresh or shoteh, or I think even a mamzer, if I remember correctly, also counts. Am I wrong? Somebody can remind me. Somebody said something about that. So
I remember there's definitely discussion of it. I don't remember what
yeah.
I think it does count.
Yeah. So yeah, Isaac, point very well taken. So all right, good. I think we have time. Let's do Masha, you want to keep reading? Do you want to read Bob for us? So, since you started on it anyway. So.
Oh, I'm sorry. I thought I didn't even see the Bob.
Yeah, it's okay.
I'm looking at an on-screen one that's very blurry. Sure. נולדו לו זכר ונקבה ומתו והניחו בנים, הרי זה קיים מצוות פריה ורבייה. Is that it?
I keep going. Yeah. It's B'med Dvarim Amarim, I think.
My text is so blurry. Okay. Yeah. באמת דברים אמורים כשהיו בני הבנים זכר ונקבה והיו באים מזכר ונקבה. No.
Yeah, והיו באים. Yeah.
מזכר ונקבה, אף על פי שהזכר בין, sorry, I have to flip the page. Someone should go because it's going to take me a while.
Right, I'll take over just because we're on time. Ben bito, ben akeva bat beno. Ho'io u'mishne banav hem ba'im, hare kiyem mitzvat pirya urviya. אבל אם היו לו בן ובת ומתו, והניח אחד מהם זכר ונקבה, עדיין לא קיים מצווה זו. All right. So, it's the Haggah is going to say the thing about the moms there, but so right, generally, if your children, right, here's the way I'm reading this, and people tell me if I'm wrong. With Hey and Vav together, if you have two children, a Zachar and Keva, you fulfilled Pri Arviyah. If one of them dies, all right, then you have unfulfilled it unless each of them, or both of them die. Let's take that case for the moment. Unless each of them has also left at least one child. And the combination of their children are of, each of them has a child of a different gender than the other one, if I got that right. So in other words, right, if I have a male and female grandchild who came from the two of my children separately, then I have fulfilled Pri Arviyah. But while they're all still living, I have fulfilled the mitzvah up until the point when one of them dies, I think. I think that's what's going on. So unless somebody has a thought on that, I'll leave it there. And in the Haggah, right, the Rama says, Haya haben mamzer o cheresh shotev katan kiem hamitzvah, right? Even though these are people who will actually see, mamzer, there are limited opportunities for a mamzer to marry and procreate, although that's a little bit complicated. Cheresh and Shoteh, we're going to see is at some point, I think we're going to probably go over this, actually have marriage derabanan, although they're patur from mitzvot. And a katan, of course, will eventually be obligated mitzvot, but is not at the moment. So, good. I'm trying to think if there's anything I wanted to see here with the 4 minutes we have left. Let's push on the Shulchan Aruch instead of seeing Achronim. We can do one more, I think.
Katan is a little odd on that list, no?
Yeah, it's a great question. Whenever Katan shows up with Cheresh and Shoteh, like one way to see it is it just like the list got just copied over, and it's like they don't love dafka Katan. We're not talking about that. And the other possibility is like I was thinking about this, and I want to play this out a little bit because if you look at
do you need to be worried any moment that your kids do you need to keep reproducing it?
Yeah, it's the Chakat Mechokek brings this whole thing of like if your ben is a saris, so what if if your daughter marries a saris, have you fulfilled it? Like, yeah, that's okay. So there is like the sense of like, all right now this is like my personal case. I have a male child and a female child, not in that order, in the opposite order. At the moment, have I then fulfilled Pri Arviyah? I guess so, but it can be unfulfilled at some point. God forbid, Rahman al-Islam. But it's
Are there a lot of other examples of mitzvot that you fulfilled and then all of a sudden circumstances beyond your control, you've unfulfilled them?
Yeah.
It seems like a very strange reality.
It's a great question.
Off the top of my head, I can't think of any. I can't think of anything I've ever heard like that of unfulfilling something that you had fulfilled already.
Well, hang on. What if we were talking before about the idea of Pri Arviyah as like maintaining this ongoing line of reproduction from your family? And so what if instead of seeing it as a one and done, like I had kids and now I'm done, instead conceptualize it as I have maintained this transmission of like my family, my genetics, however you want to think about that. Mm-hmm. And so it's more like, are you Shomer Shabbos, right? Like, are you Shomer Shabbos? Well, you kept the last Shabbos, but then this Shabbos you broke Shabbos,
Yeah.
You keep kosher? Well, you kept kosher until today and you had the bacon, so if you see it as an ongoing mitzvah as opposed to a one-time mitzvah, like say Brit Milah, then I think that is maybe more in line with the way they're conceptualizing it. Even though I think it makes total sense to think of it as like, I had kids and now I'm done, but like maybe that's not how they see it.
Yeah, it's a great point. And I can imagine some of like the belief mitzvot, right? Assuming you think that those are mitzvot, right? It might be there, right? Like I believe in God, I believe in God, I believe in God. Oh, today I didn't stop believing, and that might be something in the same line. I don't know. Sarah's giving me a look like I'm completely wrong. So I'm gonna,
No, I don't think you're wrong. I'm just trying to think about if you think there's a mitzvah to marry, then if your spouse dies, that's basically an analogous scenario.
Great point. Oh yeah, very good point.
Or you get it.
Right, but it is sort of within the same category. It is an interesting question if there are,
yeah. So all right, I'm gonna see, we have 1 minute. I'm gonna read Zion and just push on with it, and then we'll take over for the next review. For the next one, I assume we'll probably finish up Aleph next year, and so we can finish up the Seifim as well. So Hayulo Vanim Bioto Akum Vinikayer Hu Vehem. That's going to be a controversy. Hareze ki mitzvah, a mitzvah zo. Aval im hayu lo vanim kashu eved v'nishtachrer hu vehem lo ki mitzvah zo ad she yoldu lo acher shenishtacher. So, right, if you're a non-Jew and you convert, and according to some people, your children also convert. According to some sources, that's not the case. If you've fulfilled Pri Arviyah, as long as you had children beforehand, but that's not the case with an Eved. There's so much to say about this topic, which is why I'm going to leave us there, because I have no good answers for any of it. All right, Tov, hopefully this was helpful. I'm always willing to take feedback on how these go, and I will put up the recording as well. Thank you, everybody, and Shana Tova. to everybody. So
Shana Tova and Shakor.
Before we end.
yeah, Masha, go for it.
I'm just confused about the calendar moving forward, and I'm not sure if I have all of the notifications. So can somebody just go over when the next time we're meeting in the?
Good. They haven't sent it out, but I believe that obviously this Monday is Erev Rosh Hashanah, so we're not meeting. But during the Aseret Yemei Teshuvah, I believe we are meeting that Monday. And Yom Kippur is Thursday, right? Did I make that up? Tuesday, Wednesday. Yeah, it's Thursday this year. So we won't be doing a review session that day. I'll have to figure out how we're going to do. Maybe we'll do a makeup Chazarah or something like that at some point. So maybe we'll do it during Chol Moed Sukkot.
We could do it this week. We could do it in a week.
Oh yeah.
That'll be after Rosh Hashanah.
That's a great point. Yavli, let me, I'll send an email about that. And that's, yeah. And so I believe that next Monday is the last meeting in September. Not next Monday, 2 Mondays from now. During Aseret Yemei Teshuvah is the last meeting in September for the regular shir. And then we'll be on break for a little bit until all the Chagim pass us by. I don't know about September, at least for the month of Tishrei. So.
Thanks. All
right. Kol tov, everybody. Shana Tova.
Shana Tova.
Okay, thanks again.
Shana
Shana Tova.
Tova. Thank you.